Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce our final presentation for today. Holly Gabriel will be speaking to us. I'm not going to do a big introduction. I'll just pass it over to you if you're ready, Holly.
All right, thanks, Sagan. My name is Holly Gabriel, and I am with Southern Oregon University. And unfortunately, my great colleague, Kate Jones, is not able to join me today. I knew ahead of time that she had a family emergency, and I wish her best wishes. Today, I'll be talking about accessibility in library physical spaces, going from requirements to inclusivity. Next slide, please. So during this session, I hope you'll learn more about applying universal design principles to library spaces, serving patrons with visual, auditory, mobility, and cognitive issues, using toolkits and checklists to evaluate your library, and updating your library spaces to promote inclusivity. Next slide, please. So are we making our spaces accessible and inclusive? How do we at our individual libraries serve and support people with disabilities? How can we support people with a variety of abilities, such as those who are experienced library users, as well as those who have library anxiety and intimidation? And how do we provide usable, welcoming, and comfortable spaces? Next slide, please. So regarding accessibility, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, which we said just turned 32 years old, requires public facilities and public services to be accessible. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 states that no person with a disability shall be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity of a public entity. So you might be wondering, how does Section 504 define a person with a disability? And that would be a person with either a physical or a mental impairment that significantly limits one or more major life activities. Next slide, please. So how do we move from those requirements of the ADA towards more inclusivity in our library buildings and spaces and services? So what I mean by inclusivity here is producing or giving equal access to opportunities for users who might otherwise be marginalized or excluded. The ALA's Library Services for People with Disabilities policy declares that libraries should use strategies based upon the principles of universal design to ensure that library policy, resources, and services meet the needs of all people. And thank you to Elizabeth for putting that URL in chat. Next slide, please. So objective number 1 is applying universal design principles to library spaces. Next slide. Universal design is creating products and environments that are accessible to people with a wide variety of abilities and characteristics, including gender, age, height, languages spoken or read, and cognitive abilities, for example. Universal design has 7 main principles, and they were developed in 1997 by a group of architects, project designers, and engineers at North Carolina State University, and the effort was led by Robert Mace, who was an architect. Examples include sidewalk ramps, otherwise known as curb cuts, ramp entrances, automatic doors, and flat panel light switches. Next slide. So I'd like to go over the 7 principles of universal design, as well as share examples for library physical spaces. The first principle is equitable use, which is the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. So an example in our libraries would be a library desk or library table that raises and lowers depending on the user's height. And this could be for our patrons as well as for our library employees. And also for users who are using wheelchairs and mobility devices. The second principle is flexibility in use, which the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. And so this example would be having a library exhibit where visitors can both view or listen to the content of the exhibit, depending on their preferences and their abilities. Number 3 is simple and intuitive use. The use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, or current concentration level. So an example for a library could be a self-checkout station for books and other materials. A checkout station that has clear step-by-step instructions along with pictures of those steps so that it can be used by all people. Number 4 is perceptible information. The design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. And so this example could be clear directional signage that has clear and concise font so that users with impairments or low vision will still be able to see the directional signs. Let's see. Number 4, perceptible information. Design communicates necessary information effective to the user, regardless of ambient conditions. Yeah, I covered that one. Clear signage. Next slide, please. I think I lost my place there for a moment, but I'm back on track. Number 5, tolerance for error. The design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. This could be a ramp with buffers on each side and railings, side railings, so that someone using a mobility device will not accidentally go over the edge. And this also helps people who are pushing book trucks or strollers or any other type of material. Number 6, low physical effort. The design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue. So this would be automatic doors in our high traffic areas in our libraries, as well as automatic sinks and automatic soap dispensers. And finally, number 7, the size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use, regardless of the user's body size, posture, or mobility. An example would be a library classroom that has wide enough aisles for different body sizes and users to navigate the room. And like our keynote talked about this morning, having enough open space so that users can navigate through the space. And so at this time, I'd like to pause briefly And I'd like to encourage users to type into chat any additional examples that they can think of regarding these 7 principles of universal design. And so feel free to type those into chat, and I'd be happy to read those for people. All right, multilingual signage. Yes, at my campus, we have a lot of international students, and that could be very helpful. Audio and visual fire alarms are very important too, so that different sensory ways to know that there's an emergency. For someone who can't hear the audible alarm, they can see a flashing light. Automatic doors requirement reminds me, would this be incorporated with issues like key card access? Right, because we're not only talking about our patrons, we're also talking about our employees. And so, right, I do think that's important. Elevators for spaces with multiple floors. And height accessibility of library stacks and width of aisles. Right, that's an important issue too, that patrons and employees have enough space in the aisles to navigate. And 60, and Tom says 60 inches sweep around obstacles. So particularly in our classrooms where there might be a lot of people gathering, or at an event where a lot of people might be gathering, to have plenty of room for individuals with mobility devices and people with different heights and body sizes can navigate the space. And lever door handles, which are easier for people with arthritis to open, and easier for all users, easier to open those door handles, especially if you're carrying a big package. It's much easier to use a lever door handle than it is to turn a knob. And right, power cords stretch across the floor as a big problem. They should be covered so that nobody trips over them. Jennifer says lots of options for how to use this space, different kinds of chairs in different locations, counter heights at service desks, extra equipment available for checkout. Placement of temporary obstacles such as wet floor signs, right? So we don't want them to be a hazard for people to trip over, but they do need to be prominently displayed if there is a wet floor. So yeah, we have to use our best judgment there. And different lighting options for different people's sensitivity. Okay, great. So feel free to keep adding those different examples into chat, and I'll continue here with the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you, everybody, for those great examples. So objective 2 is serving patrons with visual, auditory, mobility, and cognitive issues. Next slide, please. Support for visual impairments includes adaptive computers with zoom text and book magnification, accessible wayfinding or directional signs with clear fonts and clear sizes, especially signs that indicate where the computers are that have assistive technologies. Room number information in Braille is helpful. Having narrative maps of our library, and in this case, I mean either a written or audible map that provides directions within our physical building and highlights items of note, such as the elevators and the service desks. For example, at SOU, users can download the Aware Audible Wayfinding app to obtain audio directions for those items of note. And this is used campus-wide, and the library participates in this wayfinding app. Next slide, please. So I'd also like to talk about support for people with color blindness. The majority of people with color blindness do see color. However, they see a much narrower range of color. And so it's important to use both colors and symbols when you're designing posters or signs or websites. And keep your design minimal. Limit your color palette for websites and signs. They recommended having 2 or 3 colors to minimize the chance of confusion. And avoid bad color combos such as red and green. When I was looking at statistics about how frequent color blindness is, 1 in 12 men are colorblind and 1 of every 200 women are colorblind. And so the image on the screen on the left-hand side, the first column, is normal color vision. And on the right are 3 columns of different types of color blindness. The middle 2 are the most common, middle 2 columns, which are the green-red color deficiency or green-red color blindness. And then the last column on the far right is blue color blindness. As you could see, for the green and red color blindness, colors like red, orange, and green all look brown. And that's because for color blindness, a person who's colorblind, any color that contains red or green will might cause confusion. And so purple has some red in it. And so that's why they have trouble distinguishing purple as well as red and green. Okay. I hope that I've, oh, and I also wanted to share what would be a good color combination. And one example that I read would be an orange-blue color combination. And as you can see from this image, for the different types of color blindness, you can still distinguish between orange and blue. All right, next slide, please. Support for auditory impairments. Clear signage about which computers have the accessibility tools. Like we've talked about, a visual alarm or a flashing light that operates at the same time as the audible alarm. Reduce echoes with noise absorbing panels, ceiling panels, and soft furnishings. Sometimes our library spaces can be a lot louder than we anticipated, and there are ways to reduce those echoes. And for classrooms and events held within the library, provide a microphone for speakers and easy links to ability to apply for disability services and American Sign Language translators. And like our keynote just said this morning, for some people, listening to a speaker using a microphone is helpful, and for others, it's not so helpful. But I think we all interact with our environment a little bit differently. And for a big event, I think it is helpful to have microphones for speakers. And as Margaret says, closed loop, a wireless transmission of audio, which is another option for those who are using hearing aids or are hearing impaired. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, support for physical or more mobility impairments, the adjustable height service desks. Hopefully all of you have a low service desk as well for patrons who are using wheelchairs. Accessible workstations with adjustable heights, accessible study rooms, meeting rooms, and classrooms, and then restroom stalls that accommodate wheelchairs and different body sizes. Next slide, please. I'd also like to talk about neurodiversity, which is a range of differences in individual brain function. So it's the idea that we each experience our environment and interact with our environment a little bit differently. Examples of neurodiversity include autism, Tourette's, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Also, with neurodiversity, people have different sensitivity to strong light and noise. So for many, strong light can lead to increased headaches, migraines, and anxiety, and noise can lead to poor concentration, mental fatigue, and decreased productivity. It's also worth noting that some people do like background noise when they're studying and do like to have a little ambient noise. So it can really vary in a person's preferences for noise or background noise. And, next slide, please. So support for people with light and noise sensitivity. If possible, reduce fluorescent lights because they've been known to create migraines and headaches. If possible, use LED bulbs or natural light. Create designated spaces with low light. Streamline space to minimize visual distractions and clutter. And for noise sensitivity, designate spaces for quiet work. Have noise canceling headphones available at your checkout service desk and use dividers to reduce noise. And Gary says, in addition to height of desk and service counters, some service points have too large a depth of a countertop between where the patron is and where the employee is located. This can impact hearing impaired people as well as people passing materials back and forth. Right, so we really do have to look at our service counters and make sure that they're accessible and appropriate. And the photo in this slide is from the University of Iowa Library, where they have natural dividers between these study carrels and natural light. I also like how the space is not cluttered. Next slide, please. All right, objective number 3, using toolkits and checklists to evaluate your library. Next. So I'm happy to show this DUCS accessibility toolkit. You've seen it because our previous presentation presenters showed this Alliance Accessibility Toolkit. I also like it because it has a listing of digital accessibility policies and statements from the Alliance community colleges and universities. So if you're interested in what Alliance members have for their library policies, as well as some campus-wide policies are listed. And I've included the URL here. And thank you to Elizabeth for putting that in chat. Next slide. The next checklist that I'd like to highlight today is the Equal Access Universal Design of Libraries from the DO-IT Center, which the DO-IT Center stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. And That center is located at the University of Washington. However, they do have a global scope, so they have global efforts. They have an excellent guideline and communication hints, and they discuss both library services, physical spaces, and technology. Next slide, please. So here are just a sample of the universal, of the communication hints from that Do It checklist. And some of the communication hints include talk directly to the person with a disability, not through their interpreter. Do not interact with a person's service dog unless you have permission. Do not touch mobility devices without the owner's consent. Do not assume physical contact like handshakes or high fives is okay. And understand that not everyone uses eye contact. I've included the link, and thank you to Elizabeth for putting the link in chat. Next slide, please. I'd also like to highlight the Library Accessibility Alliance Toolkit. The Library Accessibility Alliance is an academic alliance of the Big 10 universities. And so they have created a tool that is very helpful and talks about library physical spaces. And if you're interested in more of the legal considerations of the ADA, such as a breakdown of Title II and Title III of the ADA, I think that this is a good toolkit to take a look at. Next slide, please. And finally, the last resource that I'll share is the Project A, serving students with autism spectrum disorder in the academic library. And this is out of Florida State University. And I liked it because it provides information about characteristics of students with autism and includes interviews with autistic college students, and provides characteristics such as that these students might not use eye contact when they're asking for assistance at the service desk. They might have trouble engaging in a conversation. They might be really focused on a narrow topic and really want to do a deep dive into that topic. And also they might exhibit repetitive behaviors. And this training manual recommends a strong connection between disability services and the library. They also have a nice section about hiring student employees for the library. And one suggestion to be more inclusive was to give all of the interviewees, all of the student interviewees, a list of the questions ahead of the interview, so that students have a little time to prepare and to decrease their level of anxiety, excuse me. Okay, Kathy says that Florida State is her alma mater. Next slide, please. Objective number 4, updating your library spaces to promote inclusivity. Next. So according to the self-determination theory, there are 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and a sense of belonging. So those include a sense of personal control and choice, feeling capable of achieving desired outcomes, and a genuine connection with others. And I think we can all relate to these 3 basic needs. And fortunately, the library can support these basic needs, especially improving a student's sense of belonging, belonging on campus. And there's a lot of research that shows when we increase a student's sense of belonging on campus, they have better student success in their coursework, as well as improved retention. Next slide. So what are some ways that we can make our library spaces more welcoming for all? The carpet and wall design should not be overstimulating. Comfortable seating to relax and natural light if possible. Family restrooms and diaper changing stations. Have gender neutral restrooms. Have artwork that's representative of the students and your community to increase that sense of belonging. And allow food and beverages in appropriate areas, which would be away from the computer stations. Next slide, please. One way to make the library more welcoming might be to have a sensory recalibration room. These rooms are meant to reset the mind after sensory overload. And they're not only designed for autistic students, but they are also helpful to all people who want to improve their mental health and well-being. So some items that a sensory recalibration room might contain are tactile fabrics and surfaces, since the focus of the room is on the sensory experience. Active seating to rock or sway, such as the hammock that's listed, that's shown in this picture, that can help reduce some of that extra energy or anxiety that we have. Fidget toys, stress balls, puzzles, or coloring books, and whiteboards for drawing or doodling. And the room should have soft, calming colors. And Shayna says, gender neutral bathrooms serve not only non-binary patrons and employees, but also those with disabilities who may need assistance from a caregiver who is not of their same gender. Thank you. Or for people with children, exactly. Next slide, please. Biophilic spaces help connect us to nature. So biophilia means a love of nature. And as humans, we do have a natural desire to be surrounded by natural elements. So for example, the photos on this slide include natural colors, wood tones, and greenery, the green plants. And so studies have shown that when we're surrounded by these natural elements, it decreases our blood pressure, it can decrease our anxiety and improve our mood or our happiness level. So it can be live plants as well as fake green plants and a lot of wood and natural elements. Next slide, please. And this photo incorporates some of those elements, such as the wooden stools and the rug that incorporate natural tones. There's calm green colors here. And then we have the whiteboards in the back of the room for people who want to doodle or sketch. Next. If you have a room that doesn't have windows or rooms without windows, it can be helpful to incorporate some of these items, such as wooden bookcases and pictures of trees or other natural elements. This can help make the room feel more welcoming when there is a lack of natural light coming from the outside. Next. Okay, libraries as inclusive spaces. Summarizing what Kate and I learned, we created our own one-page checklist to augment the other checklists that I've covered today. There's 3 main sections, including accessibility, sensory recalibration rooms, and biophilic design. And it's not available today, but it will be after the event. It'll be available as a document on the conference website. And so at this time, if Elizabeth would stop sharing the PowerPoint and instead share a copy of that Word document, I'd like to highlight a few of the bullet points from the handout. And Carolyn says that captions have disappeared. And so if we could enable the captions again, please. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, other people are saying that they are still seeing captions. So you might want to check on your own Zoom settings and just double check to see what they show.
I think we have it fixed.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm still seeing the PowerPoint. So when you get a moment, if you could, great, thank you so much.
My apologies.
No worries. So libraries as inclusive spaces. It's meant as a checklist to help make your space welcoming for all. There's 3 sections here, and I'll just highlight a few of the bullet points for you. Under accessibility, if you have the second bullet says, keep your lowered accessible counter clear at all times. Do not store items on it. Hopefully you all have an appropriate lower service desk. And it's really tempting to put staplers and brochures and other types of office supplies on that lower table. But it's important to find a different space for those materials, since this is a service desk and you want it to be approachable and welcoming. Also, mark the corners, steps, and edges with high visibility, contrasting color materials so that people don't trip or mistake the edge. Keep hallways clear of clutter. I think we have a tendency to park our book trucks or book carts in an area, and I think we should be careful not to put it right around a corner where a patron or others could run into those items. Another bullet is consider how persons with disabilities will be evacuated from your facility in an emergency, and make sure that your employees are aware of that procedure. So have regular trainings and make sure that the new employees know these procedures as well. And the last bullet under accessibility is reduce decibel levels of restroom hand dryers to make the noise less jarring for autistic people. This might require working with facilities or other units on campus, but I do think that sometimes that noise level can be very shocking to people. The middle section is sensory recalibration rooms. I'll highlight just a few here. The focus is on the sensory experience, and I suggest having a room policy that sets clear examples, saying that stating the focus of the room, the purpose of the room, and that it's available to all users. And lastly, a section on biophilic design that help connect humans to the natural environment to reduce stress, improve cognitive function, creativity, and well-being. I've listed that you could consider incorporating small water features, which I know water features in libraries can be problematic, so something to consider. And natural paintings and the use of biomorphic patterns. Biomorphic patterns are rooted in nature, such as a leaf of a tree and showing the patterns in that leaf, or the patterns in cells or other elements that we find in nature. So I hope this checklist is useful to you. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes so that you can glance at those bullet points that I didn't read out loud. So I'll just pause here for another moment while people can look at these bullet points and also type anything into chat here for a moment. Leslie says, during a remodel at her previous institution, they modified the exterior stairs for traction, but the new metal lines created a magic eye effect. Yeah, where it was incredibly hard to see the edge of each stair. It was awful, and most folks clung to the railings or started using the ramp. Could definitely have used some high visibility materials. Right, yep, there's areas in my library where the floor just has a slight ramp and the carpet doesn't mark this with any type of yellow tape. So I always find myself stumbling a little bit. And this can also be the case around like compact shelving. If you have that in your library, the floor might change a little bit, and it's important to mark any changes in the flooring. Cheryl says she noticed a punching bag in the sensory room. Would exercise equipment cause issues on appropriate use? So, right, I think that you'd have to set clear boundaries so that if a person's using that equipment, that they're not disrupting other people in the room. A lot of people have like excess energy that they're trying to get rid of. And so they might like shake their hands very nervously, or just trying to release that energy. And so, right, there's a balance between using that equipment, like I think the image also showed a stationary exercise bike, to be able to use that in a way that's not disruptive to others in the room. And automatic shades can be helpful in the library rooms that get full sunlight. Right, I think that's a good point, because I've noticed that I can be sensitive when it's full sunlight, especially if there's glare and especially if it's hitting my computer screen. So yeah, shades over the windows can be very helpful. At this point, Elizabeth, if you would stop sharing the screen, I'd love to just have the Zoom boxes so that we can have a discussion with the time left. I'll mention that in my slides, I also include a bibliography and my contact information. But with the remaining time, I'd like to ask the group a couple of questions for discussion points so we can share lessons learned. If people would like to share either in chat or unmute your microphones and share some best practices and lessons learned that you have from your library, as well as some partners that you've worked with on campus, on your campus, and any challenges that you'd like to share today. So with that, I'll just leave space for discussion.
Would you like help with monitoring chat, or would you prefer to read through things?
Yeah, if you're willing to help, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I can jump in. There is a comment from Jennifer saying the sensory recalibration and biophilic design pieces seem like they could also really apply to trauma-informed practices and design, which is applicable in EDI/DEI scopes. There's a bit of a follow-up on being concerned that people says, I could see people wanting to exercise not for sensory recalibration causing issues like too long, etc.
Right, yeah, sometimes over our lunch break or just need to have a break during the day to get some movement. And I can understand how people might stay on that machine for a long time. Oops.
Saying definitely feel free to unmute yourself, I say as I was muted.
We've been able to work with our Office of Disability Service to create a narrative map of our library. And we're just in the final stages of that project so that we can put our narrative map on our library website, so that that'll be another way that users can learn about our physical space and items of note inside our building.
Another comment that came in saying large windows viewing nearby nature scenes are great visually, but they can also act as auditory mirrors, redirecting sounds from people and equipment into other parts of the building.
Right.
Jennifer asked, is the narrative wayfinding with the aware wayfinding app too?
Yes, yes.
And if this wasn't mentioned, it is helpful to not shelve too high or too low. A challenge is movable furniture. It's nice in our classroom to be able to rearrange the room, but now I'm thinking about how to ensure it's always set up in accessible ways, especially thinking about clear pathways.
Right. I like that statement because we want our students to have autonomy and be able to move the chairs around to fit their needs and have a whiteboard there that, to work in a group if necessary, or work solo with a whiteboard. But we also want a little bit of control over where exactly they'll move all these whiteboards. We don't want them to become a hazard and block hallways in case of an emergency, or have chairs blocking exits and that type of thing. So it is a balance between allowing students and patrons to rearrange furniture to some degree, but within reason, and still maintaining clear pathways.
There's a comment saying a video tour of the library that explains where different sections are and how to use the library could be really helpful for someone who has never used an academic library and has anxiety about going to a new place. That actually brings up a related question to me. I'm curious if you have suggestions for how you, we've thought about doing a video tour, and we also worried about the trying to keep it updated to keep track of changes. And I'm curious if you have suggestions or if you've navigated that with your own wayfinding work.
Well, one thing that we did to celebrate Libraries Week is we made short clips of different aspects within the library. And so they were 5 minutes or under, and talking about different aspects of the library, like our research help services. And so, that was maybe a 4-minute clip, and then that would make it a video tour a little easier to update, because you would just have to update that one clip of, like, let's say your special collections changed and you just needed to update the video tour of that one area. But I do think you should keep them fairly short, because students would want to watch a video that isn't too long or too in-depth. So I would recommend keeping those segments to 5 minutes or less. Yeah.
There's one comment saying not to mention for short attention spans. There's a previous comment. We had one situation a few years ago where we had a patron with Tourette's, and unfortunately our entrance is a 2-story concrete filled room. I was concerned for that person's comfort level.
Right, thank you. That goes along with the idea that we all experience our environment and interact with our environment differently. And it's important to keep those differences in mind as we try to make our spaces as welcoming as possible.
We're getting close to on time, so I want to give a last call for any questions folks might have.
And I did put my email address in the chat. If you have any other questions and would like to contact me, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And also, like I said, the PowerPoint also includes a bibliography and my contact as well as Kate's contact information too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for closing us out today, Holly. This was a really great presentation. I learned a lot, so I just really appreciate it. Everyone, we'll be reconvening at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I hope I can see all of you there, and if not, it'll be recorded and on the website soon.